All my life, I thought I was the perfect mother and grandmother. Until one day, my granddaughter said something that made my heart stop.
Grandma, we now have a room with a view of the pool. For the real grandmother. She's coming from Miami.
I realized there was no place for me. Not in the house. And it seems not in their lives. My name is Olivia. I am 68 years old. For many years, I gave my daughter and granddaughter everything I had. My money, my time, and my energy. Until I realized that I was just a free servant. What happened next? How did mother and daughter become enemies? And where is the line between love and humiliation? Don't change the channel. This story is not just a story. It is a warning to everyone who once gave themselves completely and was left with nothing. 7 in the morning. My house is filled with that special, ringing silence that only those who live alone can hear. I wear it like an old, uncomfortable but familiar robe. I drank coffee, looking at the scarlet maple leaves outside the window. Autumn. Nature is preparing for a long sleep. And my hamster will seem to spin forever. And then it sounded. Not the melodious ringing of the home phone, but that sharp vibrating howl that comes out of my iPhone. My heart, that old traitor, skipped a beat and began to beat faster, like a trained dog hearing a command. The name Jessica lit up on the screen. I took a sip of coffee, giving myself a second. Just 1 second of respite before the world demanded my complete and unconditional surrender again. My daughter's voice was even businesslike, without unnecessary preliminaries.
Hi, Mom. Listen, there's an emergency today. I have a crucial conference call with Costa Rica at 10. Pick up Ella from school at 3.
Not a word about how I was doing. Not a single "how did you sleep?" Straight to the point. I felt the familiar tension tighten my shoulders. Jess, I have a physical therapy appointment today, I said cautiously, rubbing my sore knee. My constant companion, always put off until later. Finally. I've been waiting 3 months for this appointment. There was a short, irritated silence on the other end of the line. Jessica sighed, and her voice took on that painfully familiar tone of reproach.
Mom, why are you being so difficult? Can't you just postpone it? It's just some physical therapy. And my contract depends on this call. You don't want your granddaughter to be left without a new iPad, do you? The old model can't handle her educational programs anymore.
It's just physical therapy. The word stung me like a slap in the face. That just was my last hope of walking again without this constant nagging pain. I'll try to call. I gave in, and immediately felt a taste of shame in my mouth. Shame for my own weakness. Jessica's voice instantly became sweet and light as meringue.
Thanks, Mom, you're my savior. And by the way, please don't forget to pick up that protein bar she likes. And juice. We're completely out.
We have nothing. That phrase, coming from their fancy new kitchen in Hillsborough, with its massive refrigerator full of organic food, always made me smile bitterly. Okay, I said quietly.
Great. Love you. I gotta run.
Click. Silence filled the kitchen again, but now it was different, heavy, echoing like after an explosion. I put the phone down on the table and looked out the window. My gaze fell on the old swing that little Ella loved to swing on. I remembered how she laughed, throwing her head back and shouting, "Grandma, higher! Fly to the clouds." Back then I felt needed. Loved. Not a replaceable battery in someone else's successful life. I slowly got up, went to my purse, and took out a folded piece of paper. A referral to a physical therapist. I had been calling that clinic every day at 8 in the morning for a month to get an appointment that someone else had canceled. I put the paper back. Then I picked up the phone and found Physio Solano in my contacts. My finger hovered over the call button. Numbers flashed through my mind. Not the ones in my retirement accounts but others. $150 for Ella's robotics classes last month. $300 for Jessica's new tracksuit because the old one doesn't fit anymore. $500 transferred to the communal fund, which in their house was the size of my own pension. I put the phone down. Not now. I'll call later. From the car. On the way to the supermarket for protein bars and juice, which were completely out of stock. I finished my cold coffee. The bitterness spread across my tongue. as familiar as the pain in my knee. I put on my robe of silence again, but today it seemed unbearably heavy. Today something new was hidden in its folds. A tiny, barely discernible seed. The seed of what I would later call my rebellion. I was standing in line at the supermarket, clutching a box of Ella's favorite protein bars. They cost as much as my own lunch. In front of me, a woman in her 50s was gently adjusting the scarf of an elderly man, probably her father. He was grumbling and being difficult, but she smiled patiently and stroked his arm. My heart sank. I imagined myself in 20 years' time, a difficult old woman, with Jessica looking annoyed as she bought me bars because she had to. My phone vibrated. A new message from Jessica. Not a text but a voice message. With my heart in my mouth, I held it to my ear, hoping for, "How are you? Sorry I canceled your appointment."
Mom, did you get the peanut butter bars, not the chocolate ones? Ella loves chocolate now. If you haven't bought them yet, get the chocolate ones. Thanks.
I looked at the box in my hand. Peanut. Of course, peanut. Like last time. Like always. I put the box on the nearest shelf, feeling as if I had lifted a weight off my shoulders. I went to the shelf with the bars and found the chocolate ones. My hand wouldn't reach for them. Instead, I dialed the clinic's number. My fingers were shaking.
Hello, Solano Clinic.
Hello, this is Olivia Reynolds. I have an appointment today at 3:30 p.m. with the physical therapist.
Yes, Mrs. Reynolds, I see you. We'll confirm your appointment. We'll see you at 3:20 p.m. to fill out the forms.
I closed my eyes, feeling a strange mixture of horror and triumph spread through my veins. I can't come, I exhaled. Please reschedule. For any other date. There was a pause. I could hear the keyboard clicking.
Of course. The next available slot will be, in 3 weeks, on the 18th, at 2 p.m. Is that okay with you?
3 weeks. I'd be on the phone again for a month. But something inside me, that very seed, had sprouted and taken root. Yes, I said more firmly. That's fine. Sign me up. I put the phone in my bag, turned around, and headed for the exit, leaving the bars on the shelf. I didn't buy the chocolate or peanut ones. My heart was pounding like a thief's after a successful robbery. I had just committed my first crime. A crime called me. On the way to school, I stopped at a pharmacy and bought myself the most expensive, heavily advertised painkiller I could find. Not the cheap ones I usually bought to save money. The ones that promised 24-hour relief. I swallowed the capsule with a bottle of water right in the car and felt like a traitor. I was spending money on myself that should have belonged to Ella. Her future. Her iPad. When I pulled up to the school, Ella was already waiting for me on the bench, swinging her legs in the brightly colored sneakers I had bought her last week. When she saw my car, she beamed and ran toward me. She flew into the car, smelling of childhood, apples, and carefree innocence.
Grandma, did you bring the bars?
Her eyes sparkled with anticipation. I looked at her, this pure, innocent creature who loved me not for the bars but just because, and who had no idea that I was a servant in the play of her life, staged by her mother. No, sweetie, I didn't bring any today, I said, my voice trembling. I forgot. She pouted, but only for a second.
It's okay. Mom will buy some. Are we staying over tonight? Can we watch Frozen?
Are we staying over tonight? That phrase pierced me through and through. For her, my house was a second home. For her mother, it was a storage room for a child in case of an emergency at work. Not today, sweetie, I said, starting the engine. Grandma has things to do. She didn't beg, burying her face in the phone I had given her for her birthday. I looked at her in the rearview mirror and felt two women fighting inside me. One was a grandmother who wanted to spoil her granddaughter, carry her in her arms and give her the world. The other was Olivia, who had finally realized that the world she had given her was built on the ruins of her own life. I drove her to their house, the same big, cold house with the perfect lawn and no photos of me on the mantelpiece. Jessica was already waiting on the doorstep, still in her business suit, with her phone to her ear.
Did you get it? Great. Mom, thanks, you saved me. How's the physio? Can you handle it?
She didn't even look at me. She didn't see that I hadn't bought the bars. She didn't see the new pack of pills on the passenger seat. Yes, I said, looking straight at her. I rescheduled.
Good job. Bye, Mom.
The door closed. I sat in the car and looked at their perfect facade. And then I looked down at my sore, twisted arm resting on the steering wheel. And for the first time in many years, I felt something other than pain. A slight, barely noticeable tingling sensation. As if blood had begun to flow back into my numb limb. It was a beginning. The next morning, I woke up with an unfamiliar feeling. Not with a heavy heart, but with a strange, aching anticipation. Yesterday's little rebellion, not buying the bars, postponing the appointment, left a bitter taste of freedom in my mouth. I even felt less pain in my knee. The phone rang right on schedule at 7:15. Jessica. I looked at the phone lying on the kitchen table and let it ring 3 times. My heart was still pounding, but now there was something else besides fear in it. Answer. My daughter's voice sounded bright, almost playful. That was always a bad sign.
Mom, good morning. Listen, Ella has a performance at school today at 11. I can't get away, I'm busy with a project. Can you go? She'll be reading a poem.
The suggestion sounded like an order. And as always, the most powerful argument was used. I wouldn't get to see my granddaughter take the stage. My heart skipped a beat. Okay, I said, and immediately kicked myself mentally for this instant capitulation. I'll go.
Great. You're my savior. Oh, someone's calling on the other line. Bye. And Mom, wear something more modern, okay? Last time you wore that old blue jacket.
The line went dead. I slowly put down the phone. More modern. I looked at my reflection in the microwave door. Gray hair pulled back into a messy bun. A simple housecoat. Yes, I was unfashionable. I was old. I was the shame of her shiny, polished life. The recital turned out to be sweet and touching. Ella, her face painted with makeup, read her poem about autumn loudly and expressively. When she finished, her eyes immediately scanned the hall, looking for me. She waved at me, beaming, and I waved back, feeling tears running down my cheeks. It was for this moment. For that light in her eyes when she saw me in the crowd. After the performance, she ran up to me, still excited from her performance.
Grandma, did you see me? Did you see me?
I did, sweetheart. You were the best. We left the school, and I led her to the car, holding her hand. She chattered nonstop, and I listened to her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the warmth of her little hand in mine. It was that moment of pure, unclouded happiness that I lived for. Suddenly she said, looking at me with her big, clear eyes,
Grandma, will you ever come live with us?
The world around us froze. Even the birds seemed to stop chirping. Why do you ask, sweetie? I asked cautiously, feeling my fingers grow cold.
Well, we have a room in our new house with a view of the pool. Dad says it's for Grandma Gloria. She's coming from Miami and will live with us forever. But there's no room for you, Grandma Olivia. Mom said it's too far for you to drive.
Too far to drive. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. For 10 years I had driven across town in all kinds of weather, through traffic jams, rain and snow. For 10 years my old car had been her personal taxi. And now 50 miles to Hillsborough was too far. I stood there unable to move, clutching my car keys in my numb hand. I looked at Ella, at her clean, innocent face, and saw her mother's cold, calculating eyes behind it. It wasn't a child's phrase. It was a sentence handed down to me by my own daughter.
Grandma, why are you frozen?
Nothing, sweetheart. I squeezed out, my voice sounding strange, hoarse. Just thinking. I took her to the car, sat her down and buckled her in. I did everything automatically, as if my body was moving on its own, while the real me remained standing on the sidewalk, broken and humiliated. It's a long way to go. While I was driving Ella home, she kept chatting, but I could hardly hear her anymore. There was a deafening ringing in my ears. I looked at the road ahead and saw not the asphalt but Jessica's face. Her calm, confident face, from which she had erased me like an old, unnecessary inscription. I drove Ella to their house. This time Jessica came to the door smiling.
Well, did you do well?
Yes, I replied briefly, without getting out of the car. I did well.
Come in, Mom. Would you like some coffee?
I looked at her perfect house, at her perfect life, in which there was no room for me, in which I was so insignificant that they didn't even bother to warn me that I was being replaced. No, I said, my voice quiet but clear. I have a long way to go. I saw Jessica's smile falter for a moment. Something flashed across her face, surprise? Annoyance? But she quickly regained her composure.
Well, as you wish. Bye, Mom.
She took Ella into the house without even turning around. And I sat in the car and watched as the door closed. The very door behind which there was no place for me. I didn't go home. I went to the park, the very one where I used to push little Jessica on the swings. I sat down on a bench and watched the children playing. And for the first time in many years I allowed myself to cry. Not quietly and surreptitiously, as I usually did, but loudly, sobbing so hard that passers-by turned around. I wasn't crying because of the candy bars. Not because of the reception I had endured. I cried because of the room with a view of the pool. Rooms for a real grandmother. And when the tears stopped, I wiped my face and looked at the setting sun. And inside me, where only a sprout had been that morning, something hard and cold was now maturing. A stone. Determination. I sat on my bench in the park, my tears already dry. All that remained was an emptiness that was beginning to fill with bitter, poisonous clarity. Images that I had stuffed into the furthest corner of my mind for years came flooding back. I wasn't just a single mother. I was an accountant who, after my husband's death, worked not out of fear, but out of conscience. Not for my career but for survival. Every penny counted. I remember counting pennies at the supermarket, putting aside a cheaper jar of yogurt so I could buy Jessica a new dress for prom. It cost $120. For me at the time, that was an astronomical amount of money. I walked around for 3 days wondering if it was a crime to spend that kind of money on one night. But I bought it. I wanted her to have as good a time as everyone else. And then college. New York University. Prestigious. I still remember the numbers. They're burned into my brain. Tuition. $45,000. Dormitory. $15,000. Books, food, transportation. Another $10,000. Total. $70,000 per year. 4 years. I sold the house Robert and I lived in. Our home, our garden, our memories. I got $180,000 for it. The rest was loans. Loans that I paid off over the next 10 years. Every month, $900 went just to pay the interest. I worked overtime, took on extra reports, didn't sleep at night. And Jessica was studying. She was settling into the big city, going to parties, sending me photos with her friends in cafes. I looked at those photos and felt proud. I thought I was buying her a future. Looking back now, I realize I was buying myself an illusion. An illusion of gratitude. An illusion that one day she would look back and say, "Mom, I achieved all this because of you." She never said that. I look at the women my age here in the park. They walk with their husbands holding hands. They go on cruises. Last month, my friend Carol called me from Venice. She laughed into the phone as she told me how their gondola almost capsized. Meanwhile, I was taking Ella to the dentist because Jessica was at an important conference. The dentist charged me $300 in cash. I gave him the last of what I had in my rainy day fund. Carol has grandchildren too, but she sees them once a month, brings them gifts, spends a few hours with them, and goes back to her cozy home, where she has time for books, her garden, herself. And me? It's like I gave birth a second time. Only this time without the hope that the child will ever grow up and become independent. Let me calculate. Not approximately but precisely. Like an accountant. Jessica's education, $280,000 college, plus $25,000, tutors for admission, equals $305,000. Post-college assistance, $25,000, rent for her first apartment in San Francisco, until she gets on her feet, plus $15,000 car because you can't live in California without a car, equals $40,000. Ella, $500 per month for private kindergarten 5 years, equals $30,000. Clubs, clothes, toys, doctors, approximately $400 per month, 8 years, equals $38,400. Total, $68,400. Gifts, emergencies, wedding, at least another $50,000. Total, 305 plus 40 plus 68 plus 50. Approximately $463,000. $463,000. With that money, I could buy myself a little house by the ocean. I could travel around the world. I could live without worrying about whether my pension would last until the end of the month. I could have avoided working overtime all these years, and maybe my knee wouldn't be in such terrible shape now. But I chose a different path. I chose to be an ATM. An ATM that not only dispenses money, but is also ready to drop everything and rush across town at the first call. An ATM that has to be modern, not old, not unfashionable. An ATM that has no place in the room with a view of the pool. I sit and watch the sunset. It is especially beautiful today, orange, pink, purple. And I realize that in all these years, I have never allowed myself to just sit and watch the sunset. I never had time. I always had things to do. They're things. I take out my phone. On the screen is a photo of Ella from the matinee, smiling at me. I love her. I will always love her. But I can no longer buy that love. I can no longer pay for my place in their lives. I slowly get up from the bench. My knee aches, but I hardly notice the pain. Because something new is burning inside me. Not anger. Not resentment. But a cold, sober determination. They think I'm an old, worn-out ATM. They're wrong. I am Olivia Reynolds. And I just turned off my service. I stood at the door of their new house in Hillsborough with a gift. A beautifully wrapped book of fairy tales for Ella. I didn't call, I didn't warn them. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That very room for a real grandmother. To make sure that the child's words were not a random phrase, but a reflection of a monstrous reality. Jessica opened the door. She was wearing an expensive loungewear outfit that I had seen in an online catalog, and that cost half my pension. Her face showed slight surprise, then slight irritation.
Mom? We weren't expecting you. You're in Chicago, it's a long way to get here.
The phrase, "a long way to go," echoed yesterday's conversation with Ella. The sarcasm she didn't even try to hide. I know. I just brought a gift for Ella, I said, stepping over the threshold of their luxurious mansion. The air smelled of expensive air freshener and freshly brewed coffee. Everything was perfect. Glossy floors, white walls, minimalist furniture. This house was the embodiment of their new status, the very future, for which I had once sold our old house in Chicago with Robert. And now, standing here, I realized that there was nothing in this future for me. Not even a chair. And then I saw it. On the mantelpiece. Where our photos with Robert used to hang in my old house, where my favorite painting used to hang, now there were large, stylish portraits. Jessica, Mark, and his mother, Gloria. They were laughing, hugging each other on the beach. A happy family. My face was not in any of the photos. I had been erased. Like erasing an old inscription from a new notebook. I walked further into the dining room. A large oak table designed for 6 people. Perfectly folded napkins lay on each place setting. And a light silk scarf hung on one of the chairs. Not mine. Is this Gloria's place? I asked, pointing to that chair. Jessica was confused for a moment.
She's visiting right now. She's coming back next week. To live here permanently.
I see. My gaze fell on the shelf in the corner. There were several of Ella's old toys there. And among them was not the knitted handkerchief I had made for her first Christmas. It was her favorite. She fell asleep with it pressed against her cheek. Where's the bunny? I asked quietly. The pink one with the long ears? Jessica waved her hand as if shooing away an annoying fly.
Oh, that old one? It was so worn out. I threw it away. We bought a new one made from eco-friendly materials.
Threw it away. The words hung in the air, heavy and merciless. She didn't just throw away a toy. She threw away a piece of me. A piece of Ella's and my shared history. At that moment, Ella ran out of her room.
Grandma. You're here.
I crouched down to hug her, feeling my hands tremble. I handed her the book. This is for you, sweetheart. She was delighted, but immediately looked at her mother.
Mom, can Grandma stay for lunch?
Sweetie, we haven't set the table today. And Grandma is probably in a hurry.
She looked at me. Her gaze was polite but firm, impenetrable. There was not a hint of warmth in that gaze, not a hint of what should be between a mother and daughter. There was only polite tolerance for an uninvited guest. I stood up. My knees were weak, but I stood up straight. Yes, I said. I looked at Jessica one last time. At her perfect house. At her perfect life. At her new ready-to-move-in real grandmother. Goodbye, Jessica, I said quietly. She didn't notice the farewell tone. Or she pretended not to notice.
Bye, Mom. Thanks for the book.
I walked out onto the street. The door closed behind me with a soft click. The sound was as final as the blow of an executioner's axe. I got into the car and looked at their perfect facade in Hillsborough. The very house I had invested in, denying myself for years. The house where there was no place for me. And then I understood. Finally and irrevocably. I was not a mother or a grandmother to them. I was a resource. Like oil, like gas. As long as I flowed, I was needed. As soon as I dried up, I was crossed off the list of assets. I started the car and drove away. Back to Chicago. To my modest aging house, which suddenly seemed to me not a cage, but my only true refuge. I left without looking back. There was a long road ahead, but for the first time in many years, I knew I was going in the right direction away from them. The next day, the phone rang at exactly 7:10 a.m. I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, having been awake all night. I replayed my conversation with Jessica over and over in my head. Every word she said. Every mistake I made. But now, as I stared at the vibrating phone, I didn't feel the usual fear. I felt only an icy emptiness. I picked up the phone. Good morning, Jessica.
Hi, Mom, I need you to pick up Ella from after-school care. Listen, today is a critical day. Ella needs to be picked up from school at 3. I'm running late.
I closed my eyes. That same image came back to me, the room overlooking the pool. The room for the real grandmother. No, I said. My voice didn't waver. I can't. The word hung in the air. Small heart as a rock. 3 letters I had been afraid to say my whole life. Jessica laughed, but it was a nervous, fake laugh.
What do you mean, I can't? You don't have anything else to do.
Nothing else to do. Those words burned me more than any insult. My whole life, my whole identity was reduced to that, to having nothing else to do. My life has changed, I said, and my voice grew stronger. I signed up for yoga. And I finally made a doctor's appointment. And maybe I just want to sit in silence today and read a book. There was a long, deafening silence. I could hear her breathing into the phone. Steady, stifled. Her voice suddenly became quiet. But there was steel in that silence.
Mom, if you don't want to be part of our family, then you won't see Ella. We'll find another nanny.
A threat. The very one she had always sought from me. A threat to take my granddaughter away from me. The very granddaughter for whom I had agreed to all these years of humiliation. Before, these words would have thrown me into a panic. They would have made me apologize immediately, agree, run away. But now I looked out the window at my old maple tree, and it seemed as strong and unshakable as my new decision. Jessica, I said with deep, inexpressible sadness, but also with a clarity that surprised even me. I've always been part of the family when you needed something. When you needed to pay, pick up, sit, help. But being part of a family isn't just about responsibilities. It's also about respect. It's about gratitude. It's about a place at the dinner table.
What are you talking about? What place? I offered you a place to stay yesterday.
You offered me a stool, Jessica. My voice rose for the first time during the conversation, but it wasn't a shout, it was a cry from the soul, which finally asserted its rights. You offered me a stool in a house that was partly built with my money. In a house where there is a room for your husband's mother, but not for your own mother. Silence again. This time it was heavy, ringing. Her voice became cold, accusatory.
So it's all because of some room? Are you jealous? At your age?
No, I replied quietly. I'm not jealous. I just finally saw the truth. And the truth is that to you, I was not a mother but a service. free and available around the clock. And now that I refuse to provide that service at your beck and call, you threaten me with the most precious thing I have. I took a deep breath, feeling tears welling up in my throat, but I didn't let them break through. Find another nanny, Jessica. Hire a driver. I'm out of the game.
Mom.
Goodbye, Jessica. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but my heart felt strangely calm. I did it. I said no. I walked over to the window and threw it open. Fresh morning air rushed into the room, smelling of fallen leaves and freedom. Then I picked up the phone and did what I should have done yesterday. I found Jessica's number. I looked at it, this digital label of my years of bondage, and I pressed the 3 dots. Block caller. You will no longer be able to receive calls or messages from this caller. I pressed OK. Silence. Absolute in healing. I was alone. But for the first time in many years, I was not lonely. I was with myself. And that was enough for now. The silence lasted exactly 6 hours. Then the doorbell rang. Sharp, insistent. I looked through the peephole and saw Jessica's face contorted with anger. She was alone. Without Ella. Fine. So this visit was not for reconciliation but for war. I opened the door. We stood facing each other, me in my old housecoat, her in a perfect business suit, as if she had just stepped off the cover of a magazine.
Did you block me?
It wasn't even a question but an accusation. Her eyes flashed with lightning. Yes, I replied simply. Consider it my I can't. Her voice trembled with rage.
Are you crazy? I have a child. I needed to contact you. And you're playing some stupid game.
Game. I laughed, and the laughter sounded bitter and tired. Jessica, my whole life with you for the last 10 years has been a game. A slot machine where I always lost. The game is over.
What do you want? Money? Do you want me to pay you? For being a grandmother?
I want you to treat me like a human being. I blurted out. Like a mother. Not like a service that's always at your beck and call. Do you even realize that I missed my surgery because of your phone call? That I've been living from your call to your call for the last 10 years? That I haven't had a life of my own.
You have a wonderful life. You have a house. You're retired. You have nothing else to do.
Those words hit me with all their monstrous injustice. She really thought that. She didn't see the years of working without days off. She didn't see the nights spent on reports. She didn't see my savings melting away on her education and her whims. Get out, I said quietly.
What?
Get out on the street. Let's go. I threw my coat over my robe and went out onto the porch. Jessica, stunned, followed me.
Where are we going?
Nowhere. Stand here. I pointed to our street. To the old sidewalk she used to run on as a child. To the mailboxes. To the bare autumn trees. This is my life, Jessica. This is it. Not your fancy house in Hillsborough. Not your business trips. Here. And I have the right to live this life the way I want. And if I want to spend it on myself, I have the right to do so. She looked at me, and her eyes showed complete incomprehension. She wasn't listening to me. All she heard was that her personal assistant was out of commission.
Is that so? You refuse to help your daughter? Your granddaughter?
I refuse to be your servant. There's a difference.
Fine. But don't come complaining later that we abandoned you. Don't come asking for help when you're old and decrepit and nobody needs you anymore.
She turned and walked to her expensive car. Her heels clicked on the asphalt like bullets. Every step echoed in my heart. Jessica! I called after her. She turned around. There was hope in her eyes. Hope that I would change my mind, crawl back, and beg for forgiveness. The keys, I said, holding out my hand. To my house. You're not going to be bossing me around here anymore whenever you feel like it. Her face contorted with astonishment and rage. She rummaged through her purse, yanked out the key with the heart-shaped key ring I had given her when she bought her first apartment, and threw it on the ground at my feet.
Here. Take your pathetic doghouse.
She got into her car and sped away with a screech of tires. I stood and watched her until the car disappeared around the bend. Then I slowly bent down and picked up the key. The heart was covered with dust and scratches. just like my own. I went back into the house, closed the door, and leaned my back against it. Silence. Silence again. But this time it was different. It was hard one. It was paid for with tears, anger, and a broken heart. The first day after she left was the strangest day of my life. I walked around the house listening. Not for the phone to ring. I finally turned it off. I listened to myself. To the silence inside. I expected to be overcome by a wave of panic. I expected to rush around, cry, grab the phone, unlock her number, and beg for forgiveness. But that didn't happen. There was only immense, all-consuming fatigue. Like after a long and serious illness when your body is exhausted, but you know that the crisis is over. I made myself some tea. Not the cheap-bagged kind I always bought to save money, but the expensive loose-leaf kind with peach pieces that I had been hiding in the cupboard for years, for a special occasion. Today was that occasion. I drank it sitting in the living room looking at my hands. For decades, these hands had counted other people's money, driven cars along other people's routes, and prepared food for other people's dinners. Now they were trembling as they held a cup of tea that had been bought just for me. On the second day, for the first time in many years, I had breakfast without thinking that I needed to check my phone urgently. I ate slowly, savoring every bite of toast. Then I took my old bag and went not to the supermarket for bars and juice, but to the very medical center where the physical therapist was waiting for me. The appointment lasted an hour. I had a massage, did exercises, and had some kind of equipment applied to me. It was painful, but it was a different kind of pain, cleansing, bringing hope for healing. The doctor, a young woman, asked why I had neglected my knee so much. I wanted to say family granddaughter things to do, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. I didn't find time for myself, I answered honestly. She nodded as if she had heard this story before. When I left the center, the sun was shining brightly and coldly, as it does in autumn. I got in the car and didn't go home right away. I went to the park, the same one where I had sat a few days ago. I walked slowly, leaning on the cane they had given me at the center. And that was okay. I didn't need to rush anywhere. I sat on the same bench and watched the mothers with their strollers. But now I looked at them without bitterness. I just watched. They were young. They had their own path ahead of them, their own mistakes, their own victories. On the third day, I woke up to the sound of birds singing outside the window. I hadn't heard them in many years. Or rather, I heard them, but I didn't listen. I lay there and listened to their chirping, and for the first time in a long time I thought, what do I want for breakfast today? Not what do I need to buy for Ella? Not what can I cook quickly so I can make it to the bank before it closes? What did I want? I wanted an omelet with cheese. So I made one. Then I turned on my computer and opened my online banking. I didn't look at the history of transfers to Jessica. I opened the My Accounts tab and for the first time in many years, looked at the numbers not as a resource for the survival of others, but as an opportunity for myself. I saw that after all the payments, after decades of self-restraint, I had quite a lot left. Enough to live on. Not luxuriously but decently. Enough to afford that very physical therapist. And peach tea. And maybe someday a trip somewhere. I printed out statements from all my accounts. I took the folder labeled Family. The one where all the receipts for Jessica's tuition, her old apartment, all her emergencies were kept, and threw it in the trash. Not with anger. With a sense of completion. Chapter closed. Then I sat down and wrote a list. Not a shopping list for others. A to-do list for myself. Sign up for pottery classes. I've always wanted to. Go to that museum I never had time for. Fix the leaking faucet in the kitchen for myself. Not because when Jessica comes it will drip. Invite Eleanor, my neighbor, whom I've only nodded to for years, to lunch. It was a short list. But for me it was grander than any of Jessica's business plans. Because it was a rescue plan. A plan to rescue one single life. Mine. I sat at the kitchen table, looked at my list, and realized that I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. It was a scary and wonderful feeling at the same time. It was as if I was learning to breathe again. And then I picked up the phone. I didn't unlock Jessica. Instead, I found Eleanor's number and dialed it.
Hello?
Eleanor, it's Olivia, your neighbor. Would you like to come over for coffee tomorrow? There was a short, surprised silence on the other end of the line.
Olivia?
Of course, dear. I just baked an apple pie. Shall I come over at 11?
11 would be perfect, I said and smiled. For the first time in many years, the smile was genuine. I'll be waiting. At 11 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. 3 short, cheerful rings. Not at all like Jessica used to ring it, one long, impatient ring. I took a deep breath, adjusted my prettiest house blouse, and opened the door. Eleanor was standing on the doorstep. She was holding a steaming pie that smelled of cinnamon and childhood. Her gray hair was neatly styled, and her eyes sparkled with lively curiosity.
Olivia, dear. You look different. It suits you.
Thank you, Eleanor. Please come in. I poured coffee into my best porcelain cups, the ones that had been gathering dust in the cupboard, for special occasions. We sat down in the kitchen. Sunlight fell on the table, and for the first time in a long time, my kitchen seemed to me not a place of endless cooking for others, but a cozy corner.
You know, Olivia, I've been waiting for this invitation for 5 years. I kept wondering when you would finally get tired of running on that hamster wheel.
I almost choked on my coffee. You saw everything?
Darling, at our age, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes. I saw you rushing home from the supermarket with bags in the morning. I saw you putting your granddaughter in the car in the evenings when your eyes were wet with fatigue. I heard your daughter giving you orders through the car door.
I felt ashamed of my weakness, of my blindness, which someone from the outside could see.
But what could I say? Olivia, stop being a doormat? You wouldn't have listened to me. A person has to reach the point where the pain of change is less than the pain of what is.
She was right. Absolutely right. I had a fight with Jessica. I exhaled, feeling the weight of confession lift from me. I said no to her. And I blocked her number. Instead of condemnation, I saw approval in Eleanor's eyes.
Finally. Do you know what's the hardest thing at our age? It's not illness. It's not loneliness. It's learning to say I again. We've spent our whole lives saying we, they, you. First our husbands, then our children, then our grandchildren. But where are we?
We. That word sounded like a revelation to me. Did you have the same thing? I asked timidly. Eleanor sighed and her gaze became distant.
My daughter Sarah. She's not like yours. She's kind. But helpless. She always needed help. With money, with repairs, with advice. And I gave her everything. Until I realized that my pension was melting away and her helplessness was only growing stronger. And one day I said, enough. At first she didn't believe me. Then she got offended. And then, she learned. Now she has her own life. And I have mine. And we meet as 2 adult women who love each other but don't live off each other. They're not evil, Olivia. They're just used to it. And we taught them to be that way.
It was a bitter pill to swallow, but it was necessary. What am I supposed to do now? I asked, feeling like a lost child. I'm afraid they'll take Ella away. Forever.
They'll try. First blackmail. Then threats. They'll pressure you where it hurts most. But remember, the law is on your side. You're the grandmother. You have rights. And if they decide to play dirty, her eyes flashed. I have the phone number of a good lawyer. He specializes in the rights of the elderly. He helped me.
She took a business card out of her purse and placed it on the table in front of me. It read, Michael Rodriguez, attorney at law, specializing in family law, senior rights. I looked at that card as if it were a lifeline. I don't know if I can fight my own daughter.
It's not a war, Olivia. It's setting boundaries. You're not attacking. You're defending your territory. Your life. And sometimes that means putting cannons on the shore to keep pirates from landing uninvited. Thank you for the coffee, dear. And for your trust. You are not alone. Remember that. You are not alone.
After she left, I sat at the table for a long time, holding the lawyer's business card in my hands. A sunbeam danced on its glossy surface. I was afraid, terribly afraid, but for the first time in many years I had an ally. And a plan. I walked over to the phone. My fingers were shaking, but I dialed the number.
Hello, Michael Rodriguez's office.
Hello, I said, my voice quiet but clear. My name is Olivia Reynolds. I need some advice. Michael Rodriguez's law office was located in the city center, in an old brick building with high ceilings. When I entered, I was overcome by a feeling of unreality. I, Olivia Reynolds, who had avoided any kind of conflict for the last 20 years of my life, was sitting in a lawyer's office, preparing to declare war on my own daughter. Michael Rodriguez turned out to be a young man with intelligent, kind eyes and calm manners. He didn't look like the stereotypical predatory lawyer. That was somewhat reassuring. When I finished my story, he said to me,
Mrs. Reynolds, what you have described is, unfortunately, a classic case of financial and emotional abuse of an elderly person. You are not a mean grandmother who refused to help. You are a victim of systematic exploitation. And the fact that the exploiter is your daughter does not change the essence of the matter.
He asked to see everything I had. Bank transfer statements, old checks, even my rough calculations written by hand on a piece of graph paper. He studied everything carefully, sometimes making notes in his notebook.
The amount is $463,000. That's very serious. With that kind of money, you could live in your own house by the ocean, just like we talked about.
His words were not a reproach, but a statement of fact. That made it even more painful. But I don't want to sue her for money, I said quickly. I want her to leave me alone. And I want to be able to see my granddaughter. Michael nodded.
I understand. But to achieve that, we need to be prepared for anything. Your daughter and her husband are, by all accounts, wealthy people who are used to getting their way. They didn't just bring a lawyer to your house to try to get custody for no reason. They're going to fight.
He put down his papers and looked at me directly. So here's our plan. First, we prepare a complete financial report. All your income, expenses, all transfers to Jessica over the last 10 years. We prove that you are fully capable and financially independent. Second, we file a petition with the court for your rights to communicate with your granddaughter, based on your role as her primary caregiver for the last 8 years. This is a preemptive strike. Third, we're changing the will. Right now. So they won't even be tempted to rush the inheritance. The last words hung in the air like a heavy dark cloud. I swallowed. Until that moment, I hadn't thought things could go that far. Do you think they're capable of that?
Mrs. Reynolds, when that kind of money is at stake, people are capable of many things. It's better to be paranoid and wrong than naive and lose.
He was right. I had been naive for too long. All right, I said quietly. I agree. We spent another 2 hours in his office. I signed papers and gave him access to my bank statements. With each stroke of the pen, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I was no longer a lonely old woman who had been abandoned by everyone. I had a team. Just one person, but it was an army. When I left the office, it was already dark. I stood on the steps, looking at the city in the evening, and I didn't feel broken and humiliated, but strong. I had taken the first step. The hardest one. The next day, as Eleanor had predicted, the blackmail began. First came a message from an unknown number. Mom, it's Jessica. Call me, we need to talk. Ella is crying. She doesn't understand why Grandma doesn't love her anymore. My heart sank. I imagined her tear-stained face. But then I remembered Michael's words. They will play on your emotions. That's their main weapon. I didn't reply. An hour later, another message arrived. This time from Mark. Olivia, your behavior is outrageous. You are traumatizing the child. If you do not resume communication on the previous terms, we will be forced to consult a child psychologist and document the emotional damage. A threat. Direct and crude. Previous terms meant, get back in the stall ATM. I forwarded both messages to Michael. He replied almost instantly. Classic. Ignore it. Document everything. It will be useful in court. I put down the phone. My hands were shaking, but I was determined. They were firing at me with everything they had. But I was standing behind the fortified wall I had finally begun to build. The hardest part was the call from Ella. She called from Mark's number in the evening.
Grandma? Is it true that you don't love me anymore?
A lump formed in my throat. I closed my eyes, imagining Jessica or Mark standing over her and dictating those words. I love you more than anything in the world, sweetheart, I said, my voice breaking. Never doubt that. It's just that grown-ups sometimes fight a lot. It's not your fault.
When are you coming? Can we watch Frozen?
Not soon, sweetie. But I always think about you.
Mom says you've become mean.
I couldn't bear that. I love you very much, I said quickly and hung up. I burst into tears. Bitter, hopeless tears. I cried for my daughter, whom I seemed to have lost forever, and for my granddaughter, whom I might be losing right now. But then I wiped away my tears. I went to the mirror and looked at my tear-stained face. No, I said aloud. I'm not bad. I'm just tired of being good to everyone except myself. I was ready for war. And I knew I would win it. Not for revenge. For the right to my own separate, quiet, and peaceful life. Silence reigned in my house again. But this time it was different, tense, expectant. I could feel a storm coming. And the storm came. Not in the form of a phone call or a message, but in the form of a thick envelope with a law firm's logo on it. It was delivered by courier. My heart sank. My hands were shaking as I opened the envelope. It was on official letterhead. The language was long and flowery, but the meaning was clear even without a lawyer. Jessica and Mark, through their representative, demanded immediate resumption of financial support, citing verbal agreements, and the established practice of long-standing relations. Cessation of unfounded claims and smear campaign. In case of non-compliance, they reserved the right to file a lawsuit for malicious deprivation of financial support and stability from their granddaughter, as well as for moral damage and interference in private life. The last point was particularly cynical. They who had broken into my home and rummaged through my papers accused me of interference. I clenched the sheets of paper in my hands, and white-hot rage overshadowed all other feelings. This was no longer just blackmail. It was a declaration of war. Legal total war. I almost mechanically dialed Michael's number.
Mrs. Reynolds, I'm already aware of this. My secretary just downloaded a copy from the email. It's a standard intimidation tactic.
They want to sue me? For stopping paying them. My voice betrayed me, trembling.
They're trying, but their claims have no legal basis. You are an adult woman of sound mind and are not obligated to support your adult, able-bodied daughter and her family. On the contrary, their behavior falls under the definition of financial exploitation of an elderly person. We will respond in kind. We're filing a counterclaim, officially, for financial abuse, for violating your rights as a grandmother to communicate with your granddaughter, for reimbursement of part of the funds. We'll show them that they can't play games with us.
A counterclaim. Court. A public trial. The thought of it terrified me. Air our dirty laundry, expose our family tragedy. I don't know if I can, I whispered.
Olivia, they left you no choice. They're counting on you to get scared and give up. If you back down now, they'll milk you dry for the rest of your life. You have to fight back. For yourself. For your rights.
He was right. I understood that intellectually. But my heart was breaking. I couldn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, running through every possible and impossible scenario in my head. Shame. Scandal. Ella hearing at school that her grandmother was suing her parents. That letter was lying on the table. I got up, made some calming tea, and sat down with it in the kitchen. And suddenly a strange, almost crazy thought came into my head. I took a notebook and a pen. I didn't write a reply to their lawyer. I started writing a letter. Not to them. To Jessica. My daughter. The one who used to run around this house in funny pajamas and fall asleep in my arms. Dear Jessica. I began, and the ink fell onto the paper as if it were my own blood. I am writing you this letter because I can no longer speak. You may not even read it. But I have to try. I don't know where we went wrong. When you stopped being my little girl and turned into a woman who looks at me with cold calculation. I remember your school years, how I sat with you at night over your textbooks, how we dreamed about your future. I sold the house my father and I owned to pay for your education in New York. I thought I was buying you wings. But it turned out that I was just building a wall between us. A wall of money. You say I betrayed you by refusing to pay. But isn't it betrayal to use your mother as a bottomless wallet? Isn't it betrayal to cut her out of the most important day of your life? Your wedding, and say she's not special? Isn't it betrayal to threaten her with court and take her granddaughter away when she dared to say enough? I'm tired, Jessica. I'm tired of buying your attention. I'm tired of paying for crumbs of your time. I don't want to be your ATM anymore. I want to be a mother. But apparently you don't need that. I won't give up on Ella. I'll fight for her until the end. And if you don't feel sorry for me, think about her. What lesson are you teaching her? That love is measured in dollars? That a grandmother can be thrown away like an old toy when she's no longer useful? I don't have any more money for you, Jessica. But I still have love for you. Are you ready to accept it unconditionally? Your mother. I didn't send that letter. I knew it was useless. It wasn't for her, it was for me. To pour out all the pain, all the bitterness, all the unspoken words. I folded the piece of paper and put it in my desk drawer, next to her childhood drawings. In the morning I called Michael. File a counterclaim, I said firmly. I'm ready. The storm had begun. And this time I wasn't going to hide. I was going to face it head on. The storm I had been waiting for and dreading finally broke. We sat in the courtroom, me, my lawyer Michael, and across from us Jessica, Mark, and their lawyer. The air was cold and thick, as if charged with static electricity before a thunderstorm. Jessica didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed somewhere in space, her face a mask of arrogance, but her fingers, clenched in white knuckles, betrayed her nervous tension. Their lawyer, a man with smooth manners and an expensive suit, painted a picture for the court of my sudden emotional callousness, emotional instability, and malicious deprivation of the family's livelihood. He spoke of established practice, moral duty, and how, as a mother and grandmother, I was obligated to provide for the welfare of my own flesh and blood. When Michael was given the floor, he walked slowly to the podium. He did not argue. He simply presented the facts. He laid out my entire sacrificed life before the judge like an accounting report.
Your Honor, this is not a case about inheritance or alimony. This is a textbook case of financial abuse of an elderly person. Abuse covered up by rhetoric about family values.
One by one, with icy calm, he presented the documents. Printouts of bank transfers for hundreds of thousands of dollars, receipts for tuition, rent, and bills. And then photographs. A photo of their new home in Hillsborough. A photo of my old dilapidated house in Chicago. A photo of my scratched car and their brand new SUV.
The plaintiff claims that my client deprived them of their livelihood. Let me ask you, how many people do you know who are deprived of their livelihood, who can afford this?
Then he read excerpts from my letter to Jessica, the one I never sent. I cringed inside as I heard my most intimate, heartfelt words echoing in that soulless courtroom. But Michael insisted.
This is not evidence, Your Honor. This is a psychological portrait of the victim.
Then Jessica took the stand. She spoke smoothly and confidently, but her speech was rehearsed like a poem. She talked about my strange coldness, my sudden change in behavior, how I had pushed them away by refusing natural family support. The judge, a woman with intelligent, tired eyes, interrupted her.
Mrs. Reynolds, you hear the accusations. What do you have to say?
I slowly stood up. My legs felt like cotton, my throat was dry. I looked at Jessica, straight into her cold, distant eyes. And suddenly all the anger, all the fear, all the pain was gone, replaced by a strange, serene calm. I can only say one thing. My voice was quiet but clear, without a trace of tremor. I sold the house where my daughter was born and raised to pay for her education. I denied myself everything so that she could have everything. I thought I was buying her happiness. It turned out I was buying myself loneliness. I bought the right to be thrown aside when I was no longer useful. I won't buy anything else. Not their love, not their attention, not even a place at their table. I don't need their money. I don't need their excuses. I only need one thing. For my granddaughter to know that her grandmother loved her not for anything but just because, and that she will always have a home. My home. I fell silent. The courtroom was deathly quiet. The judge retired to make her decision. The hours we spent waiting seemed like an eternity. Finally, she returned.
The court, having reviewed all the materials of the case, finds no legal grounds to satisfy the claims of Ms. Jessica Reynolds and Mr. Mark Reynolds. Moreover, the court finds signs of unlawful conduct in the actions of the plaintiffs. The claims are dismissed in their entirety. The counterclaim to protect the grandmother's rights to communicate with her granddaughter is upheld. Mrs. Olivia Reynolds is granted the right to regular visits with her granddaughter, Ella Reynolds.
It was a victory, complete and unconditional. I didn't look at Jessica. I only saw her back as she left the courtroom without saying a word, slamming the door loudly behind her. I stood on the steps of the courthouse. The sun was blinding. Michael was saying something to me, congratulating me, but I could hardly hear him. I looked at the sky, feeling the weight that I had been carrying for many, many years fall from my shoulders. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. There was only a huge, all-consuming emptiness. An emptiness in which silence sounded for the first time. Not the silence that was filled with anticipation of their calls, but another kind of silence, the silence of freedom. Freedom bought at a bitter, dear price. I got into my old car, started the engine, and drove away. Ahead of me lay the unknown. But for the first time in my life, that unknown belonged only to me. The court allowed me to see Ella every Sunday. Our first meeting after the trial felt like landing on an unknown planet. I was waiting for her at the entrance to the park, the same one where I had once heard the fatal words about a room for the other grandmother. Mark's car pulled up. He got out, helped Ella out, and in his eyes I read a strange mix, guilt, respect, and exhaustion from this war.
Hello, Olivia. I'll be back in 2 hours.
He drove off, leaving us alone. Ella stood, shifting from one foot to the other, looking at me from under her brow. In her eyes there wasn't a child's excitement but wariness, as if she were afraid of saying the wrong thing. "Hi, sunshine," I said, my voice breaking. I reached out my hand. "Come on, let's get you some ice cream."
Mom said you did something really bad to her and Dad. That because of you we might lose our house.
Every word of hers pierced my heart like a burning needle. They'd already poisoned her against me, made me a monster in my own granddaughter's eyes. I crouched down so I'd be on her level. "Ella, I never wanted to hurt you or your parents," I said as calmly as I could. "Sometimes grown-ups fight very badly, and it's very sad. But my love for you hasn't gone anywhere. It's always here." I placed my hand on my chest. "No fight can take it away." She stared at me in silence, and I could see two truths fighting in her young mind, the one she'd been taught and the one she felt herself. We went into the park. We ate ice cream, and I didn't ask her about school, about her mom, about anything important. I just showed her squirrels, pushed her on the carousel, and slowly, so very slowly, the ice in her eyes began to melt. By the end of our 2 hours she was laughing, chasing after the bubbles I was blowing. When Mark arrived, she hugged me goodbye. Not as tightly as before, but it was sincere.
Will you come next Sunday?
"Of course I will." I smiled, feeling something warm and alive stir inside the icy emptiness. Mark nodded at me silently, and in that nod there was something like gratitude. Maybe he was tired of the war too. But with Jessica it was over. I realized it a week later, when an official letter from her new attorney came to my phone. Short, dry. They were appealing the court's decision about my visits with Ella. Grounds: negative psychological influence on the child. This wasn't an emotional outburst. It was a cold, calculated blow struck from the shadows. The last attempt to take away what little I had left. I didn't cry. I didn't call Michael. I just stood at the window watching the wind tear the last leaves from my maple tree. I thought of that woman, my daughter, who somewhere out there in her beautiful home, was spending her last strength and money to cause her mother the greatest pain possible. And I realized there would be no reconciliation. Not because I couldn't forgive, but because she couldn't stop. Our bond wasn't, for her, a thread connecting two loving people, but a rope she could pull to get her way. And now, when the rope had snapped and she couldn't tie it back, she had simply pushed away the boat I was in. I didn't fight the appeal. Michael said our chances were good, but I was too tired. Mark and I found another way. He started bringing Ella to me in secret, while Jessica was at work. These were our stolen hours, our little Sunday secrets. And maybe there was something bitter in that secrecy, but for me it was better than nothing. One evening while lighting the fireplace, I found in a box of kindling an old crumpled letter, the same unsent letter to Jessica. I unfolded it and read those lines, full of pain and hope, that now seemed to be about another woman, in another life. I didn't tear it up. I just threw it into the fire. The paper flared bright, blackened and turned to ash. I watched the flames and understood I was burying my last hope. But with it I was also burying the weight that had dragged me down for years. I was alone, in the silence of my home, with stolen Sundays and burned letters. It wasn't happiness, but it was the truth. My truth. And for the first time in many, many years that truth belonged only to me. Thank you for walking this hard road with me. If this story moved you, if it left even a small trace in your heart, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Your words truly matter. And of course, don't forget to subscribe. Together we can make something beautiful, something that lasts. See you soon.